Hey there folks, it's Arlyeon again, with this week's Crit Hit Reviews. That, and a warning that if you suffer from epilepsy, this episode could be potentially triggering due to its fondness for rapid-fire pulses of color. So, with all that said, on this episode, we'll be talking about VoidDev's retro-inspired shoot-'em-up, Void Invaders. If the graphics didn't give it away, or the fact that Void is synonymous with space, this game draws some inspiration from the early arcade title Space Invaders. But does it manage to provide an experience that's out of this world, or is it devoid of fun? Alright, so as a preamble to the gameplay section of this review, I'll address the matter of Void Invaders' inspiration to clarify any potential player's expectations or confusion. To begin, while the game is a top-down shoot-'em-up, it has a much faster-paced gameplay style than Space Invaders, borrowing more heavily from its graphics than anything, while the control scheme is similar, with only directional movement and a shoot button. Although, Void Invaders doesn't limit movement to only the horizontal plane, also allowing it vertically. Plus, there's also a handy-dandy auto-fire option, which is more or less recommended with the plethora of enemies this game throws at you, and the general quality of life it provides in giving your controller and finger a rest. And this brings us to the rest of what Void Invaders has to offer gameplay-wise. Rather than relying on the style of the game it pays homage to, Void has several different game modes, those being level, hardcore, endless, and wave modes. It also manages to cram these stages full of a variety of alternate weapon types and power-ups, varying from just more bullets to double damage or an extra ship mirroring your actions, as well as a peculiar leveling system. So essentially, once you destroy enough ships, you gain a rank, healing back to full and gaining a permanent increase in damage. That said, maximum rank is 30, so if you came to rely on the rank up system as a form of healing during matches, you're going to be sorely disappointed in the long run, especially for hardcore mode. So, with those basics aside, let's move on to the stage types. First off, there's level mode, which provides a tutorial for the game and how it plays before drawing the player through a series of 30 stages, each one requiring the player to combat very specifically arranged sequences of enemies. There are no random power-ups here, and in fact, clearing levels in a timely fashion even requires you to collect the ones that appear so as not to get overwhelmed, especially if you play them at the rank you're supposed to be. Lastly, every 5th stage provides players with a boss encounter, which helps mix things up. On one hand, whilst there's a nice element of strategy to the game, there is a few shortcomings for this mode. The most major one for me was an enemy balancing issue, with the most severe of them actually making a certain level nigh impossible to clear if you just come into it without grinding up additional ranks first, as you're essentially force-fed near unavoidable damage. The only solution to it that I found, really, was to loop through all the earlier levels again to gain some much needed offensive power so I could just murder them faster than everything could murder me. And this chains into another issue which I had with the game, which, though less severe, was still incredibly aggravating because I was unable to actually exit the game whilst in level mode. The problem here is that level mode simply resets the beginning of the current stage whenever you die, as opposed to offering you the option of escaping to the menu like other modes do. And given that hitting start and exiting the menu doesn't work in Void Invaders, yeah, I sort of needed to Control-Alt-Delete to get out, and that's a fault. That's actually probably a severe fault in some people's books. It was less severe to me than the overall enemy balancing of the actual game itself. But no, that's a fault. Regardless, if you do actually have the patience to finish all 30 stages of level mode and get to rank 30, it unlocks Void Invaders Hardcore mode, a series of 10 stages which must be cleared in one life, and which I got stuck at the first stage due to a pair of cheap enemies that just homed onto my position and played bumper cars with my ship until I died. Repeatedly. And considering that they do a tremendous amount of damage on contact, and the appearance of an extra weapon during that particular part, I imagine I'm meant to die a good number of times, to eventually learn from my mistake, preemptively figure out where the power-up is coming, and hopefully murder them before they instantaneously blow my ship up by ramming into it, but I wasn't super keen on engaging in a difficulty mode, which to start off with was going to rely on those kind of tactics, especially on one life. On the other hand, Wave Mode's somewhat simpler, as it's essentially a score attack mode that throws players against oncoming waves that become increasingly rapid as time goes on. To go along with this mode, there's also the game's Endless mode, which instead throws players against increasingly large hordes which vary in type, attack pattern, and even size. The game can actually get a bit tricky to see in this mode as you rip through the equivalent of a retro arcade armada, but it can also be pretty satisfying at times given that you're getting a fair amount of the different weapon power-ups to play with as everything's happening. Just do be aware that the sheer amount of oncoming enemies is going to lead to a metric ton of explosions, which can at times make the action hard to see and will also probably murder your eyes. Now, as for the story in Void Invaders, well, you know, I think we're just gonna rely on the pun here and say that it is devoid of story, focusing instead on its gameplay, which somewhat fitting for a sort of arcade-like experience. So either way, on to the graphics. So graphics-wise, as I mentioned earlier in the video, Void Invaders takes a lot of inspiration from Space Invaders in its aesthetic, be it from its ship and enemy designs to even the retro feeling that the projectiles give off, though the actual patterns that your respective weapons are going to be firing off, like the Wave Shotgun and Tornado Shotgun, aren't really... Space Invaders never quite had a tornado firing machine gun. Its bullet patterns are all Void Invaders. Even things like the background and the menu ooze a sort of retro arcade chic, albeit with a more bombastic flavor to it. What I mean by this is that when you kill enemies, they tend to explode into brilliant bursts of light and debris that'd make a Michael Bay movie proud. Honestly, in enemy-dense stages or the later phases of Endless mode, it's not uncommon for the screen to actually get covered in firework-esque bursts of light and shrapnel that make the game look like a 4th of July simulator. The problem being that, whilst this can appear impressive, there were moments that it was just a blinding cluttered mess that detracted from gameplay, and I was grateful I didn't have a severe sensitivity to flashing lights. When it comes to the subject of audio, while you're not necessarily going to be wowed by the sound effects for the shots being fired, or the sound of projectiles impacting into enemy ships, the actual soundtrack to the game is a nice ensemble of electronic dance music. Honestly, given the pacing of the songs in the game, it felt like a pretty decent match to me. And so this brings us to the part where I sort of tally up my final thoughts, and Void Invaders is somewhat difficult for me to judge, because I'm not really the biggest player of shoot-em-ups and bullet hells. There's a small number I really enjoy, but for the most part, it's not a genre I gravitate to. Despite this, I think it says something when I'm outright disappointed in a game for not really aspiring to do more. Whilst I don't necessarily view it as a bad thing that Void Invaders has little in common with Space Invaders other than a coat of paint, the fact that, even then, it doesn't manage that in an ideal manner, given its obsession with debris and bright explosions, clutters up the screen and works counterintuitively to the core gameplay of Void Invaders. Yeah. I had also hoped for more in regards to balancing, as I found it both tedious and disheartening that the solution to passing a certain level more or less boiled down to regrind all the earlier stages so I can cheese it into paste and thereby reduce the difficulty of levels that come after it into smoldering rubble because they weren't as imbalanced as the prior stage. Honestly, Endless mode and the boss fights were probably my favorite segments of the game, well, alongside the soundtrack, but there's not enough here for me to really recommend this to people. Sure, it's fairly inexpensive for those looking for something arcadey to poke at, but I personally rate it as a fumble, as it never really resonated with me. So, that's the end of this video. If you agree or disagree with me, or maybe just have a comment about something I said in this review, make a mention of it below, in the comments section. I'm pretty good about watching those and responding to them. You can also click to like this video and hit that shiny subscribe button if you'd like to see more of our content, since the goal is to make a new video every week until the end of time. Or my sudden demise via terrible life choices. And for those community-oriented folks, we also have an indie gamer and game developer Discord, which you can reach by clicking the link in the description or the Discord icon on the YouTube page.